There was a village where beauty was measured not in kindness or wisdom, but in how finely one dressed, how gracefully one walked, and how brightly one's shoes shone in the dust of the market road. Here, people whispered judgments more quickly than blessings, and envy grew like weeds between neighbors. In the heart of this village lived two sisters, though only one was beloved. The elder, born of the stepmother, was bold, proud, and admired for her bright clothes and sharp tongue. She had inherited her mother's hunger for admiration and the cruelty that often accompanied it. The younger, born of the late first wife, was quiet and unassuming. She wore plain clothes, worked with steady hands, and never spoke ill of anyone. Yet because she did not sparkle with boastful words, she was treated as a burden, a shadow meant only to serve. The stepmother's eyes favored her own daughter, and in the quiet girl she saw only a reminder of the first wife she had despised. So the girl lived in silence, taking on the tasks no one else wished to do, gathering firewood, cleaning ashes, carrying water until her shoulders ached. Still, she moved with a natural grace, a softness in her step that even bare feet could not disguise. And though she had no jewels, there was something about her presence that unsettled her stepsister, something that made her envy burn hotter each day. The season of the midsummer festival arrived, a time when the village celebrated with dancing, songs, and processions that filled the square with color. Every young woman polished her shoes until they gleamed, for it was said that the way one walked and danced revealed the worth of her family. The stepsister prepared eagerly, her silken shoes embroidered with gold thread. She imagined how heads would turn when she entered, how the boys would crowd to see her, how her mother would beam with pride. But her envy returned when she saw her sister preparing her simple dress, brushing her long dark hair, and slipping her worn shoes onto her feet. They were plain shoes, patched and faded, yet when the girl stood in them, her posture and calm face made her look like someone who belonged to the festival as much as any adorned in jewels. The stepsister could not bear it. "Those shoes of yours are disgraceful," she spat, her smile sharp with malice. "Do you mean to shame us before the whole village?" The quiet girl lowered her head. "I will walk at the edge of the crowd. No one will notice me." But the stepsister noticed. Always she noticed. She saw that no matter how humble her sister's clothes, the way she carried herself drew eyes without effort. And envy whispered its poison. If she walks with grace, let her stumble. If her feet carry her so lightly, let them bleed. That night, while the girl slept, the stepsister took her shoes and a handful of thorns gathered from the hedges outside the house. She pressed them deep into the insoles, careful to hide them so they would not be seen at first glance. She imagined the girl faltering with every step, blood staining her dress, the villagers laughing behind their hands. She imagined herself radiant by comparison, dancing freely while her sister limped in humiliation. When she placed the shoes back by the bed, her smile curved like a knife. She whispered to herself, "Tomorrow no one will see her as graceful. Tomorrow she will know her place." But outside, the moon hung pale and watchful, and the wind stirred uneasily through the trees, as if the world itself had overheard the cruelty planted in secret. The morning of the festival arrived with laughter drifting through the air, drums echoing from the distant square, and the smell of roasted corn and spiced bread filling the streets. Families gathered in their finest, mothers braiding their daughters' hair, fathers polishing sandals and buckles, each household eager to show itself before the crowd. Inside the stepsister's home, the stepmother busied herself fussing over her own daughter. She pinned flowers in her hair, adjusted her embroidered dress, and shined her golden shoes until they reflected the sunlight like mirrors. "You will be the jewel of the procession," she said proudly. "Let them see your beauty, your grace. Today is yours." The stepsister smiled, though her thoughts were elsewhere. Her gaze slid to the corner of the room where the other girl stood, fastening the sash of her plain dress. Her shoes waited nearby, looking unremarkable, humble, nothing worth envy, and yet, the stepsister's stomach twisted with bitterness. She remembered slipping those thorns into the insoles, pressing them until they were hidden like tiny serpents waiting to strike. The thought of her sister's coming humiliation sent a cruel thrill through her chest. The quiet girl bent to take her shoes. Her fingers brushed the worn leather, familiar from years of labor, and she slipped them on without suspicion. At first, there was only the faintest prickle against her feet, something she mistook for grit or a loose stitch. But when she stood, the sharp sting pierced her flesh like fire. She gasped softly and steadied herself against the wall. The stepsister watched, her smile small and secret. "Is something wrong?" the stepmother asked sharply, noticing the pause. "No," the girl whispered, though her voice trembled. She lowered her eyes, forcing her face into calmness. "The pain spread with each heartbeat, but she willed her lips to silence. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her stumble before the day had even begun. They set out together, the stepmother leading, her daughter radiant in silks, and the quiet girl walking behind, every step driving the hidden thorns deeper. The road was alive with color and music, children weaving garlands of flowers, men carrying baskets of fruit, women laughing as they balanced pots on their heads. Yet with each stone in the path, each uneven step, the girl's feet grew more raw. By the time they reached the square, her shoes were stained faintly dark, though no one noticed but the stepsister, whose eyes gleamed with cruel delight. The procession began, a parade of families circling the square while villagers clapped and cheered. Dancers spun in bright cloth, drums pounded like hearts, and the smell of fire-roasted meat mingled with the perfume of flowers. The stepsister moved at the center with exaggerated grace, her golden shoes catching every glint of light. Heads turned just as she had hoped, and admiration poured into her like wine. But behind her the quiet girl faltered. Each step was agony, her body screaming to stop, to sit, to tear off the shoes and free herself. Yet she did not. She lifted her chin and moved forward, one step after another, her face pale but steady. Though her shoes were plain, her endurance lent her a strange, quiet majesty. Some villagers noticed. "Why does she limp so?" one murmured. "She walks as though each step hurts, yet she does not fall," another whispered. But others, less kind, laughed under their breath. "She is clumsy," they said. "See how she stumbles? She is not fit for the festival." The stepsister caught their whispers and smiled, pleased. She thought herself victorious, certain that by nightfall her sister would be remembered only for her awkward steps and bloodied shoes. Yet not everyone laughed. A few elders watched closely, their brows furrowed. They had seen the girl laboring in the fields, carrying heavy buckets without complaint, moving always with lightness despite hardship. They knew her steps were usually sure. Something was wrong, though the girl said nothing. At the festival's height, dancers leapt in the center of the square. The stepsister spun among them, her silks flaring, her laughter bright and sharp. She glanced often toward her sister, drinking in the sight of her quiet suffering like honey. The girl meanwhile whispered prayers between breaths, not for revenge, not even for rescue, but for strength. "Let me endure," she murmured in her heart. "Let me walk until the day is done. Do not let cruelty see me fall." The sun blazed overhead and the music carried on, but in the shadows of the square, the girl's shoes filled slowly with blood. And though no one saw clearly, the earth itself seemed to notice. The dust clung to her steps, and the wind carried whispers that rustled through the festival like a warning. The trap had been laid. The first wound had been struck. But fate had only just begun to turn. The festival wound on, its colors dazzling, its music echoing through the village square. Laughter swelled, drums pounded, and dancers twirled in patterns like rippling cloth. But for the quiet girl, each beat of the drum was another stab into her feet, another reminder of the thorns buried inside her shoes. At first she thought she could endure without faltering, but the longer she walked, the sharper the pain grew. The thorns pierced deeper, each step tearing at tender flesh until her shoes grew warm and wet. She bit the inside of her cheek to keep from crying out. Her eyes stung, but she refused to let tears fall. To weep here, in front of her stepsister, would be a victory too easily handed away. Still the pain left its mark. Her gait slowed. Her steps, once light and graceful even in plain shoes, grew uneven. A small crowd began to notice, whispering to one another. "Is she injured?" someone asked. "No, she is simply clumsy," another said with a sneer. "She does not belong at a festival like this." The words stung almost as much as the thorns, but the girl kept walking. She remembered her late mother's words, whispered long ago, "Strength is not in how loudly you protest, but in how quietly you endure." Those words carried her forward, even when every step felt like walking on knives. The stepsister, spinning at the center of the crowd, noticed. Her lips curved in triumph as she saw her sister's faltering stride. Her golden shoes gleamed, free of pain, each step a sharp contrast to the bloodied suffering she had caused. She twirled, laughter spilling like cruel music, basking in the approving nods of the villagers who watched her dance. "She shines like fire," one young man murmured. Yes, the stepsister thought, her eyes flicking toward the girl at the edge of the square, and fire consumes shadows. But envy is a strange fire, it devours even as it feeds. The more the stepsister rejoiced in her sister's pain, the deeper her hunger grew. She needed the girl to stumble outright, to collapse before everyone, to be shamed completely. Nothing less would satisfy her. The girl meanwhile pressed on. The festival felt endless, a blur of drums and bright cloth, but she walked as if guided by something beyond her strength. Her shoes squelched softly with each step, the leather darkened, but her face remained calm. Pale, yes, and faint with exhaustion, but calm. Some of the elders noticed her perseverance. One leaned toward another and whispered, "See how she does not fall?" A weaker soul would have cried out by now. Another nodded. There is dignity in her suffering. It will not go unseen. The girl herself did not hear them. All she knew was the rhythm of her breath, the stabbing pain, and the determination to reach the end of the day without collapsing. If her stepsister had set this trap to humiliate her, she would deny her the satisfaction of victory. She would walk, however slowly, until the music ceased. As the sun sank lower, shadows stretched across the square. Children ran with garlands of flowers, lovers danced, old men clapped in rhythm. The world rejoiced, yet the girl moved as though between two realms, the festive world above and the silent agony beneath her feet. Once, near the well, her steps faltered so sharply that she nearly fell. Gasps rippled through those nearby. She steadied herself against the stone rim, straightened, and forced her legs forward again. "She will fall," someone whispered. But she did not. She clenched her hands and prayed softly, "If I must bleed, let it be with dignity. If I must stumble, let it not be into despair." At the height of the evening, when torches were lit and music swelled once more, she stood at the edge of the square, her body trembling, her feet screaming with every heartbeat. The stepsister whirled past, radiant and unscathed, her golden shoes flashing like tiny suns. She smirked as she met her sister's eyes, certain she had won. But in that look, the stepsister saw something she did not expect. Not hatred. Not a plea for pity. Only endurance, quiet, stubborn, unbreakable. The girl's face, pale and drawn though it was, carried a strength that no thorn could pierce. And though her feet bled within her shoes, she walked still. Not with the grace of before, but with a resilience that settled in the hearts of those who watched. A few villagers, once mocking, now whispered differently. "She is not clumsy," one said. "She is wounded." "Yet she does not stop," another murmured. "There is more strength in her step than in all the gold her sister wears." The stepsister heard these whispers and frowned. For the first time, her triumph felt uncertain, fragile, as though the very pain she had inflicted was shaping a strength she could not match. And as the torches flickered, casting long shadows across the square, the girl walked on, each step a testament, each drop of blood a quiet prophecy of the justice yet to come. The festival finally ended, the last drumbeat fading into the cool hush of night. The villagers drifted home in groups, their laughter trailing into the distance. Lanterns were snuffed out one by one, until only a few flickered in windows. The square emptied, leaving only echoes of joy behind. The girl, however, lingered in the shadows. Her steps were slow, each one a small agony, but she would not limp where others could see. Pride held her upright until she reached the narrow path behind the huts. There, hidden from sight, she sank onto a low stone, slipping her shoes from her feet. Her breath caught at the sight. Her skin was raw and torn, blood streaked her heels and toes. The thorns gleamed darkly, wicked in their cruelty, some still embedded deep in her flesh. For a moment she simply stared, unable to reconcile how something so small could cause such vast pain. Her eyes stung. She pressed her fists against them, but the tears came anyway, hot, silent, unstoppable. They traced down her cheeks in thin silver lines, falling onto her wounded feet. She wept not only for the pain, but for the humiliation, the endless cruelty of her stepfamily, the loneliness of bearing it alone. Her tears were soundless, but the night seemed to listen. The air shifted, the trees rustled softly, and the ground seemed to drink in her sorrow. The moon, pale and round above, cast its light directly on her bowed figure, as though bearing witness. Inside the house, the stepsister sat by the hearth, her golden shoes gleaming even in the dim light. She toyed with them, admiring how clean and unmarked they were. But though she smiled, she was restless. Some part of her mind whispered with unease. "Why do I feel no peace?" she muttered, frowning at her reflection in the polished metal of the shoes. "I have humiliated her, made her bleed. She should be broken. Yet." She glanced toward the window where the moonlight pooled. A strange dread stirred in her chest. It was not enough to wound her sister's flesh. She needed to crush her spirit. But deep down she sensed that spirit would not break so easily. Outside, the girl's tears slowed. She leaned back against the stone wall of the hut, her body weak but her heart strangely steady. In the quiet of the night, the words her mother once spoke returned to her. Your tears are not weakness, my child. They are seeds. Where they fall, something will grow. She touched her wet cheeks and looked at the ground. The soil beneath her was damp now, darkened by her grief. She did not know what might grow from it, but she felt a pulse in the earth, as if something had already taken root. She closed her eyes, whispering, "If truth has power, let it rise. If pain has meaning, let it not be wasted." The night answered with silence, yet it was not an empty silence. It was full, heavy, as though the air itself held its breath. At last, exhausted, she wrapped her torn feet in a strip of cloth torn from her hem and made her way inside. Each step left a faint trace of blood, but she did not care. She reached her bed of straw, lay down and closed her eyes. Her body ached, but her mind drifted into dreams filled with strange images. Flames bending away from her, rivers carrying her forward, a crown made not of gold but of thorns that turned into blossoms. She woke once in the night, hearing faint crackles in the hearth, and thought she saw her stepsister's shadow moving uneasily. Then she fell asleep again. By morning her tears had dried, but the earth had not forgotten them. Beneath the soil where she had wept, something stirred, small roots pushing through darkness, reaching for the light of dawn. The girl did not yet know it, but her silent tears had sown the beginning of her power. The next morning broke with a pale, uncertain light, the kind that seemed hesitant to pierce the gray clouds. Roosters crowed, children darted out into the damp air, and the smell of wood smoke clung to the village. Life appeared as usual, men readying for the fields, women drawing water, dogs barking at the edge of the paths. Yet, unseen, something in the earth had changed. Beneath the soil where the girl had wept, roots had begun to spread. Tiny tendrils, white and delicate as threads of silk, crept outward, drawing strength from her tears. The land that drank her sorrow now carried a secret. The girl herself knew nothing of it. She awoke with her feet throbbing, wrapped in strips of cloth already stained through with crimson. Her stepsister was bustling about, humming a song of victory as she braided her hair. The stepmother looked on approvingly, offering her elder daughter a bowl of warm milk. "And you," she said, turning her cold eyes to the girl still sitting on her straw bed, "you will clean the yard. There is mud from the festival, and the chickens have scattered the grain. Do it swiftly. Do not dawdle." The girl nodded, her voice soft, though her throat ached with unspoken pain. "Yes, stepmother." She hobbled outside, every step pressing fire into her torn feet. She stooped to sweep the mud and gather the grain, her hands shaking from weakness. Each movement left her dizzy. Yet she carried on, unwilling to give her stepmother any reason to strike her again. As she worked, she heard a faint sound, so light she thought it might be the wind. It was a whisper, curling around her like a breath. She froze, looking around, but no one was near. Only the earth beneath her, damp and dark, seemed to shift softly. She leaned closer, brushing her fingertips across the soil. The whisper rose again, clearer now, though still like a sigh. "We heard you." The girl gasped, drawing back. Her heart hammered. She looked at the patch of ground where her tears had fallen the night before. The soil there was darker, richer, and tiny green shoots had appeared overnight, impossibly fast. Their leaves trembled though no wind touched them. "What are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The shoots rustled faintly, their thorns gleaming already sharp. Again the sound came, "We are yours." A strange calm filled her chest, mingled with awe. She had heard tales as a child. Stories of the forest that could speak, rivers that could carry secrets, fire that bowed before the pure of heart. But never had she thought such wonders could touch her own life. She touched one of the shoots gently, and though its thorn should have pricked her, it bent aside, leaving her skin unbroken. She drew in her breath sharply. "You will not hurt me," she murmured. And the whisper answered, "No. We are born of your tears. We hurt only those who gave you pain." Her mind reeled. Could grief itself give life? Could sorrow take root in the soil and rise against cruelty? She looked down at her torn feet, then back at the trembling plants. A flicker of hope stirred in her chest, fragile but bright. That evening the stepfamily sat together in the house. The stepmother boasted of her elder daughter's beauty, declaring that soon she would wed a man of wealth. "We must rid ourselves of the useless one before then," she added, glaring at the younger girl. "Her presence is a stain on our good name." The stepsister laughed. "Perhaps we should bury her shoes altogether. What good are they when she stumbles and limps like an old woman?" Their laughter filled the room, cruel and sharp. The girl sat quietly in the corner, her hands folded in her lap, her face lowered. She did not answer them. But inside, her heart pulsed with a secret strength. She remembered the whisper, "We are yours." That night, when the household slept, she crept outside again. The moon was a thin sliver, pale as a blade. She knelt by the patch of earth. The shoots had grown taller, their thorns gleaming silver in the light. She spoke softly to them, her voice filled with longing. They wish me gone. They wish me broken. But you, will you stand with me? The plants swayed, and the answer came, not with words alone but with a pulse she felt in her very blood. We will. The next day the stepsister awoke with a sharp cry. Her feet, flawless the night before, were marked by small red cuts. She stumbled out of bed, clutching her ankle. Mother. Something pricked me in my sleep. The stepmother scowled, lifting the blanket and inspecting the bed. There was nothing there, no splinter, no insect, no thorn. You imagine things, she snapped. But the stepsister winced with every step, her golden shoes pressing against her cuts. By midday she was limping. The girl watched silently from the yard, sweeping once again. She did not smile, but deep inside she knew. The thorns had already begun their work. That evening, as the stepfamily mocked her again, her heart no longer trembled with despair. She sat quiet, her hands still folded, but her silence was no longer the silence of defeat. It was the silence of waiting. The whisper of thorns had begun, and it would not be silenced until justice was done. The day of the feast arrived, a day when the wealthier families of the village gathered to display their finest clothes, their ripest fruits, their choicest meats. The stepmother and her elder daughter prepared for it with great delight, as though it were their chance to prove themselves before the entire world. The stepsister's hair was braided with ribbons, her golden shoes polished until they glimmered. The stepmother wore her best shawl, bright with dyes that caught the sunlight. Their voices rang sharp through the house, commanding the girl, "Fetch water for the basin. Press the wrinkles from my gown. Sweep the doorstep until it shines." She obeyed silently, though every movement sent fire through her torn feet. They laughed at her limp, ridiculing the way she shifted her weight. "Do not walk like that before others," the stepmother scolded. "Hide yourself. Better yet, stay behind. You will bring shame on us with your clumsy steps." The girl bowed her head. "Yes, stepmother." When the feast began, music swelled in the square. Drums beat like heartbeats, flutes whistled like birds in flight. The air smelled of roasted meat, honey cakes, and fresh bread. Villagers clapped to the rhythm, their voices rising in song. The girl lingered at the edges, unseen. She had not been dressed for the feast. She wore only her plain garments, her patched shawl. But she watched quietly, her eyes taking in the joy she was denied. The stepsister meanwhile basked in the attention. She spun in her golden shoes, laughing, her voice shrill with triumph. She whispered cruelly to her friends, pointing toward the girl. "Look at her, barely able to walk, barely fit to be called a woman. And yet she dares to breathe the same air as we." Laughter followed, each giggle like a dagger in the younger girl's chest. As the feast reached its height, a strange unease crept into the air. The drums faltered for a beat, the flutes hissed off-key. A gust of wind swept through the square, carrying with it the scent of earth and rain. The stepsister stumbled suddenly, her laughter choking into a sharp gasp. Her golden shoe slipped, and when she steadied herself, blood stained the silk of her stockings. The villagers gasped. "What has happened?" She pulled off the shoe, shrieking, and within it lay a thorn, long black and gleaming as though it had grown there overnight. The crowd whispered in astonishment. The girl, watching from the shadows, knew the truth. The thorns had begun to follow her stepsister. The stepmother rushed to her daughter's side, clutching her hand. "It is nothing," she declared, forcing a laugh. "Only a splinter. These shoes are too fine, too delicate. That is all." But the whispers among the villagers did not stop. Some said it was a curse. Others murmured that perhaps the feast was being spoiled by spirits displeased with arrogance. Later, when they returned home, the stepmother's anger erupted like a storm. She seized the younger girl by the arm and hissed, "This is your doing. You bring misfortune into my house. You are a curse just like your mother before you." The girl did not protest. Her lips trembled, but she held her silence. Inside, though, she felt the quiet pulse of the earth, the whisper of thorns assuring her, "You are not alone. Their cruelty will return to them." That night, when all was still, she crept again to the patch of ground where the shoots had risen. They were taller now, their thorns darker, sharper. She knelt and pressed her palm against the soil. "They mock me. They wound me. They call me cursed," she whispered. "If I am cursed, then let the curse be theirs." The thorns rustled and she heard it again, the whisper, soft but steady, "So it shall be." From that night forward, her stepsister's shoes could not stay clean. No matter how they polished them, thorns would appear within, pricking her feet until she limped as her sister once did. The stepmother's fine gowns snagged on brambles that no one else saw, tearing into ribbons as though invisible hands had pulled at the threads. The girl remained quiet, doing her chores, tending the yard, sweeping the hearth. But her silence was no longer the silence of weakness. It was the silence of a storm gathering strength. And deep beneath the earth, the thorns continued to grow. The days after the feast brought no peace to the stepmother's household. What had begun as small pricks became wounds that refused to heal. The elder daughter's feet, once so dainty in her golden shoes, were now covered in welts and cuts. Every morning she awoke screaming, every night she wept as her stockings clung to blood. "Why is this happening?" she wailed, tossing her shoes into the corner. "They are cursed. Cursed." The stepmother, desperate to maintain her daughter's beauty, washed her wounds with herbs, smeared honey to seal them, even burned incense to ward away evil spirits. But the thorns returned, stubborn and cruel. Each time the shoes were cleaned, each time they were mended, by dawn the needles of pain grew anew. One morning, the stepmother commanded the younger girl to fetch water. She obeyed, limping carefully, her feet still tender though bound in cloth. At the well, she paused to rest, watching the ripples shimmer in the bucket. Villagers gathered nearby, whispering behind their hands. "Have you seen the elder daughter's feet?" one murmured. "They say it is punishment," another replied. "Perhaps she mocked the wrong spirit." "And the younger one?" a third added, glancing toward the girl. "She works silently, though her eyes tell stories her lips never speak. Do you not wonder if it is she who is favored by the unseen?" The girl lowered her gaze, her heart quickening. She said nothing, but the whispers followed her all the way home. At night the visions returned. In her sleep, she dreamed of the patch of earth where the thorns grew tall. They stretched upward like black spires, their tips glinting in the moonlight. She saw them weaving into shoes, shoes of thorns that wrapped around her stepsister's feet like shackles. She heard a voice, deep and steady, resonating in her bones. "They made your walk bleed. Now their path shall be torn." She woke trembling but not with fear. The dream felt less like imagination and more like prophecy. She touched her bandaged feet, whispering, "If this is justice, let it come swiftly." By the next week, the stepsister could no longer hide her suffering. The once proud girl limped through the village, clutching her mother's arm, every step followed by a hiss of pain. When she tried to join the maidens in song, her voice cracked with bitterness. When she danced, she stumbled, falling hard upon the ground, the laughter of those she had once mocked now echoing around her. "Look at her," a child said innocently. "She walks as though her shoes are full of nettles." The stepsister struck the child across the face, but the damage was already done. The villagers whispered louder now, suspicion growing like wildfire. The stepmother raged. She stormed into the house one evening, her face red with fury, and seized the younger girl by the shoulders. "This is your fault," she spat. "Your cursed tears, your cursed feet, your cursed presence. Admit it. You have bewitched my daughter." The girl's eyes filled with quiet fire. For the first time, she spoke not with fear but with steady resolve. "I bewitched nothing. You hid thorns in my shoes. And now thorns hide in hers. That is all." The stepmother struck her across the face. The blow rang through the small house, but the girl did not cry out. She lifted her chin, her gaze unwavering. That night, she went again to the patch of earth. The plants had grown taller, their thorns long as needles, their roots thick and twisted like ropes. They pulsed faintly as though alive. She whispered to them, her voice trembling with a mix of sorrow and strength. "You have heard my pain. You have tasted my tears. Now they taste theirs. Do not stop until the truth is known." The thorns swayed, rustling in answer. The whisper was soft, but it filled her with certainty. So it shall be. Soon the curse grew bolder. The stepsister found thorns not only in her shoes, but in her bed, her gown, even in the comb she used for her hair. She screamed and flung them across the room, but they always returned. Each thorn seemed to grow sharper, hungrier, as though feeding on her cruelty. The stepmother tried to shield her, but even she was not spared. Her finest shawl frayed to tatters, pierced by invisible barbs. Her hands bled as she tried to tear them free. Rage turned to desperation and desperation to fear. The villagers noticed. Whispers grew into open talk. Perhaps the elder daughter is cursed. Perhaps the younger is blessed. Perhaps the earth itself has chosen its side. The girl heard these words, but she kept her silence. She did not boast, did not accuse. She continued her chores, washing clothes by the river, sweeping the yard, grinding grain. But each time she saw her stepsister hobbling, her mother hissing in pain, she felt the thorns within her heart loosen just a little. One evening, as thunder rolled in the distance, the stepsister collapsed at the doorway, her shoes torn and bloody. She wailed, clawing at her feet. "Make it stop. Mother, make it stop." The stepmother cradled her, her face pale, her eyes hollow. For the first time, she looked at the younger girl not with contempt but with something closer to fear. "What are you?" she whispered, voice trembling. "Child of sorrow, child of thorns, what have you become?" The girl did not answer. She only turned away, her shadow long against the wall as the storm outside darkened the sky. For though she still walked in silence, the thorns had begun to speak louder than she ever could. The storm that rolled in that night was no ordinary storm. Thunder shook the rooftops, lightning split the sky, and rain lashed the earth as if the heavens themselves were warning of something yet unseen. The villagers huddled inside their huts, whispering prayers, clutching charms, trying to ward off a fear that had no name. By dawn, the rain eased, but unease remained. The story of the stepmother's household was no longer just gossip. It was spoken openly, with trembling voices. Children were warned not to pass near their yard. Women drew the sign of protection on their doors. Men muttered of curses that spread like disease. "Her shoes bleed," one villager said at the well. "Each step leaves a stain." "And her mother's hands are full of wounds, though no thorn bush grows near," another replied. "They mocked the younger child," a third added, lowering his voice, "but she walks unhurt now. The earth favors her. The curse falls on those who scorned her." The word spread quickly, faster than the wind. Soon the household was shunned. Neighbors no longer greeted them at the path. No one came to share bread or borrow salt. They were left alone in their fine house, surrounded not by friends but by whispers. Inside, fear gnawed at the stepsister's pride. She had once been the jewel of the village, admired for her beauty, envied for her golden shoes. Now she stumbled even within her own home, her feet torn and raw. She dared not go to the square, for children pointed and women turned away. Her laughter had vanished, replaced by cries that echoed in the night. "Mother! Mother, I cannot bear it. The thorns, always the thorns. They follow me even in my dreams." The stepmother, weary and pale, tried to soothe her. But her own hands bore cuts, her own garments snagged and shredded by barbs only she could feel. Sometimes when she passed the hearth, sparks leapt unexpectedly, singeing her sleeves. It was as if the very elements turned against her. And always, in the corner of the house, the younger girl sat silently. She tended the fire, fetched water, ground the grain, yet she moved with a calm that unsettled them more than any scream. Her eyes, once downcast, now held a steady, quiet fire. She spoke little, but her presence filled the air. One night, unable to endure it, the stepsister screamed at her. "It is you. You have cursed us. Admit it." The girl did not answer. She only looked at her stepsister with calm, sorrowful eyes, the kind of gaze that made the guilty tremble. "You buried thorns in my shoes," she whispered at last. "And now thorns follow your every step. That is no curse of mine. That is the justice of the earth." Her voice was soft, but the words carried like thunder. By then, the villagers were not only fearful of the stepfamily, they were fearful of her. Mothers told their children, "Do not mock her, for the earth listens when she weeps." Men passing by lowered their heads in silence, unsure whether to bow or flee. Some said she was blessed by the spirits of the soil, that her tears had watered roots of vengeance. Others whispered darker things, that she was no longer entirely human, but half shadow, half sorrow, a girl whose grief had bound her to powers beyond their understanding. Yet none dared to confront her. For though she was small, though she was quiet, the thorns spoke for her, and no one wished to feel their bite. One evening, as the sky burned crimson with sunset, the village elders gathered in secret. They debated long into the night. "We cannot let this spread," one said. "If their family is cursed, who knows if it will reach our homes?" "But it has not touched the younger one," another argued. "She walks unharmed. Perhaps she is chosen. Perhaps we should honor her." "Honor her?" the first scoffed. "What if she turns her eyes upon us next? No, better to drive her away. Better to sever the root before it chokes us all." But another elder shook his head. "Do you not see? The curse is not hers, it is theirs. She has done nothing but endure. If we cast her out, we may cast out the only one who can still plead with the earth for mercy." No decision was made. Fear divided them, and the night ended with silence heavier than before. Meanwhile, the girl knelt once more by the patch of soil where the thorns had first grown. They were taller now, reaching to her waist, sharp and black against the moonlight. She touched them gently, her torn feet resting in the cool earth. "Will it end?" she whispered. "Or will it grow until the whole village bleeds?" The thorns swayed, their whisper curling around her like smoke. "It will end when truth is known. Until then, pain will walk where cruelty walked first." She bowed her head. Her heart ached, not only with the memory of her own wounds, but with sorrow for all that was yet to come. The night of reckoning began without warning. The stepmother woke to the sound of scratching on the walls. At first she thought it was a stray animal clawing at the hut, but when she lit a lamp she saw lines being carved into the wood, thin, jagged grooves, as if invisible nails were raking their home. Her stepsister screamed from the other room. The mother rushed in to find her daughter standing barefoot, clutching her feet, blood seeping between her fingers. The floor was littered with fresh thorns, thick as nails, sharp as needles, glistening with a strange, dark light. "They are inside me," the girl cried, collapsing to the floor. "They grow from my skin." Indeed, when the mother tried to pull the thorns free, they did not come away easily. They were rooted in flesh, sinking deeper the more she tugged. Word of the torment spread quickly. By dawn, the villagers gathered at a distance from the hut. None dared step closer, for they saw thorns crawling up the walls like vines, piercing through the roof, curling out of the windows. It was as though the house itself was being consumed by a forest of pain. And in the midst of this, the younger girl walked calmly to the well. Her bare feet touched the soil, but no thorn rose against her. Children clutched their mothers, whispering in awe. She lowered her bucket, drew up water, and drank as though nothing unnatural was unfolding only a few yards away. "See," one villager muttered, "the earth spares her." "She commands it," another answered, fear twisting his voice. "No," said an old woman softly. "She does not command. She suffers, and the earth suffers with her." Inside the hut, the stepmother's strength crumbled. She raged, she wept, she begged the girl to stop whatever curse she had cast. "You brought this upon us," she screamed, hair wild, eyes red. "You with your silence, your tears, your false innocence. Admit it. Admit you are a witch." The girl did not flinch. She placed the water jar on the floor and spoke quietly. "I'm no witch. I only endured. The earth sees what is done in secret. It returns what is sown. You planted cruelty, and cruelty has grown back to you." Her voice was steady, and in it was a weight heavier than thunder. The villagers, drawn by the cries within, pressed closer to the hut. Fear battled curiosity. Some believed they were witnessing punishment from the gods. Others feared they would be next if they lingered. Yet no one could turn away. They saw the stepsister stumble out at last, barefoot, her once fine dress torn and bloodied. She crawled onto the dirt path, thorns sprouting from her heels, digging into the earth with every movement. She reached toward the villagers, shrieking for help. But not a soul moved forward. Men who once admired her beauty looked away. Women who once praised her charm clutched their children tighter. Even her friends who had giggled at the younger girl's misery in years past, turned their backs. For they all saw that her pain was self-made, her cruelty reborn in her own flesh. The stepmother followed, staggering, her hands wrapped in rags to stem the bleeding from invisible cuts. She glared at the villagers, then at the girl who still stood calm, water jar in hand. "Do you see?" the stepmother cried to the crowd. "This is her doing. She has cursed us, all of us. She will bring ruin to every house if we do not stop her." But even as she spoke, the thorns rose higher, coiling around her arms, wrapping her waist. She tried to tear them away, but they tightened, biting into her skin. The villagers gasped as blood blossomed across her dress like red flowers. "No," someone whispered. "Not her doing. The earth's. The earth has chosen sides." The girl finally stepped forward. She set down the jar at her feet and raised her hands, not in anger, not in triumph, but in sorrow. "I asked for nothing but kindness," she said, her voice carrying clear across the silent crowd. "Yet they gave me cruelty. I wept, and the soil drank my tears. Now the soil remembers." She turned her gaze upon her stepmother and stepsister. They writhed, bound by thorns that seemed alive, pulsing, tightening with every scream. "You cannot escape what you planted," she said. The words were not loud, but the thorns answered. They surged upward, encasing the stepmother and her daughter in a cage of brambles so thick no light pierced through. The villagers heard one final cry, high, desperate, choked with pain, and then silence. When the thorns loosened, there was nothing left but two pale figures, slumped and still, pierced through by countless black spines. The villagers trembled, waiting to see what the girl would do next. But she only knelt, bowed her head and whispered a prayer. The brambles quivered, then crumbled into ash, scattering on the wind. The bodies, too, dissolved, leaving only the memory of their cruelty behind. No one dared speak. The air was heavy, not with smoke but with awe. At last, the eldest of the village stepped forward. He bent his knee, not to a queen, not to a witch, but to a child who had endured suffering and emerged untouchable. "You have walked through fire and thorn, and the earth has walked with you," he said. "From this day none shall harm you. From this day we honor you as the one the soil remembers." And one by one the villagers followed, bowing low, not out of fear but reverence. That night, the thorns that had overrun the stepmother's hut withered and fell away. By dawn, nothing remained but bare soil, rich and dark as though the land itself had been cleansed. The girl stood there alone, the ashes of cruelty at her feet, the village watching in silence. She did not smile, for grief was still heavy in her chest. But her eyes, clear and steady, seemed to hold both sorrow and strength. The reckoning was done. And from that day on, none in the village forgot. Cruelty once sown returns in thorns, but endurance grows roots deeper than any pain. The village awoke the next morning to a silence so deep it felt holy. No cries of pain, no scratching thorns, no raging storms. The air smelled fresh, as if the night had washed the cruelty of years away. For the first time in many seasons, sunlight broke through the trees, scattering gold across the soil where the stepmother's hut had once stood. The ashes had vanished. In their place, tiny green shoots had already begun to sprout, fragile, tender, and impossibly fast. Children pointed in wonder, whispering that the earth had chosen to plant new life where cruelty had died. Some said it was a sign of forgiveness. Others believed it was the beginning of something sacred. The girl stood at the edge of the clearing, barefoot, her water jar in hand. The villagers gathered behind her, hesitant but eager. No one dared step ahead of her, for it felt as though the soil itself bowed to her presence. That day, work in the village did not begin with tools or trade. Instead, it began with quiet offerings. Women brought baskets of grain and laid them at the girl's feet. Men carried jars of honey and fruit. Elders placed clay lamps upon the earth and lit them, flames flickering in the morning breeze. The girl said nothing at first. She only poured water from her jar onto the soil where the hut had been. To everyone's astonishment, the water spread like silver, soaking the ground without vanishing. The shoots grew taller before their very eyes, unfolding leaves as though they had waited for her touch. "She blesses the land," someone whispered. "No," said another, awe thick in his voice. "The land blesses her, and us through her." Life in the village slowly began to change. Where once envy and cruelty had thrived, people grew gentler, afraid to repeat the mistakes that had led to such reckoning. Mothers reminded their children not to mock the weak, lest the soil remember. Fathers taught their sons that no laughter should come at another's wound. And in the heart of it all was the girl. She did not claim power, nor wear crowns, nor demand service. She lived simply as she always had, drawing water, weaving cloth, tending small fires. But wherever she stepped, the soil grew richer and plants rose stronger. The villagers began to say that kindness itself had taken human form. One evening, as twilight spread across the fields, the elders called a gathering. They asked the girl to sit at the center of the circle. Torches flickered, shadows danced, and all eyes turned to her. "You have endured what none should endure," said the oldest among them, "and the earth has borne witness. We ask you, teach us how to walk without planting thorns in another's path." The girl looked at the circle of faces, men who had once turned away, women who had once whispered, children who had once laughed at her pain. She saw guilt, but also yearning, and she knew that what had happened to her was not hers alone to carry. "I will teach you," she said softly. "But remember, what I teach is not mine. It is the earth's. What you sow you reap. What you give you receive. The soil never forgets." Her words settled like seeds in every heart. Seasons turned and the village grew into something new. Crops flourished as never before. Rivers flowed clear, fish plentiful. Travelers passing through spoke of a strange peace in the air, as though the very ground hummed with harmony. Some called the girl a saint, others a daughter of the earth, others simply, the one the soil remembers. Yet she herself remained unchanged. She carried her water jar each morning. She spoke little. She did not seek glory. Her only power was the quiet truth of her endurance, and it was enough to transform everything around her. The cruelty of the past had ended. The soil, once poisoned by envy and malice, now drank in kindness and it blossomed. And so the village, once haunted by thorns, became known as the Garden of Dawn, because from its darkest night had come the gentlest light.